may not know me, my name is Mark Melanson. I'm the Executive Director of the California Community Living Network. And we've been holding monthly member meetups since the pandemic began as a way to stay connected and continue to offer member benefits to our folks. So we're super excited to be here today for today's CCLN monthly member meetup. Want to just let folks know that this session is being recorded. It will be edited and posted to our website at ccln.org for future viewing. We're excited today to begin what we envision to be a series of trainings on inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. Our CCLN IDEA subcommittee, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access. We're still sussing out that name, but we thought that IDEA was a good theme for this type of topic. But that subcommittee has been meeting regularly and planning trainings to offer to our membership. I want to thank our CCLN members who dedicate their time and participate on the CCLN IDEA subcommittee. We have representation from A Better Life Together, STEP, Omalega, EdJoin, who was recently rebranded and was formerly known as Community Catalyst, Living Options, Manos, TLC Supported Living Services, and Connections for Life. So we have a pretty broad representation of our membership on this committee, and it's one of my favorite subcommittee meetings. We were meeting monthly for our first 8 or 9 months, and now that we've got some solid plans for a training series, we're now meeting every other month. So great group of folks, privileged to work with them on what we can bring you today. And in the future for trainings on diversity, inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. A special shout out to Edie Thomas from Connections for Life for introducing us to our speaker today. We do hope that today's session will challenge us to examine ourselves and to empathize with others. The title, the informal title is Cognitive Bias, Race, and Intersectionality. Today, we're very excited to have Dr. Jeremiah.pearcey, who spent some time not only with our IDEAS subcommittee, but also with our board before getting this session confirmed. Jeremiah is a doctor of cognitive psychology and a military veteran with over 15 years of experience employing and teaching diversity and inclusion from a psychophysiological or mind-body approach. He specializes in conscious and unconscious bias, psychological constructs of organization, intersectionality, and stress, using integrative modalities, guided meditation, progressive muscle relaxation, sensory deprivation to improve the understanding of these processes and their impacts on daily life. A passionate scientist and scholar, Dr. Pearcey is dedicated to raising awareness of biases, why they're innate and needed, and providing tools for individuals to notice and overcome these prejudices. He currently works as the Director of Community Outreach for the Institute for Spirituality and Health in Houston, Texas, and is CEO of COSMI, COSME LLC, which designs psychoeducational programs for Veterans Administration, police departments, nonprofit organizations nationwide, and others. We're excited to have you here today, Dr. Pearcey. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Jeremiah.pearcey. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, everybody, for attending today. It is my pleasure to be here with you all and to provide this training. And it's my hope that this isn't a training where I'm talking at you, where I'm telling you what to think or feel or even do, but to really engage you and try to demonstrate how your brain works, how humans' brains work, really, and to help you see how bias is not only innate in humans, but is needed, and that awareness of our own biases is the key to overcoming those. So with that, I will share my screen. And I created this PowerPoint to try to engage So I hope that this will be something that you guys can all engage in. And there are a couple suggestions that I have for that, which we'll get to in a second. So this is kind of a general guideline of what we're going to cover today. So first, what is diversity and inclusion? And then the categorization machine. So really talking about the brain and how it functions. We'll go into some in-group and out-group material to discuss how we categorize people and what an in-group and an out-group are. And then we'll get into the more specifics of unconscious bias. And then we'll focus and wrap up by talking about inclusion with a guided meditation at the end, with the hope that it will, on some level, allow you to empathize with people that maybe you haven't empathized with before. So the suggestions I have for this throughout this whole session is to find a seat that has really good support. So when we get to the meditative part, having neck support will be extremely helpful so that it won't disrupt your ability to go through this guided meditation. So if you aren't already, please find a chair, couch, bed, whatever works best for you, where you can get really comfortable. Another suggestion is to have a pen and paper handy. So in this moment while we're getting started, if you could grab a pen and paper, there'll be some kind of examples that we'll go through later on that will really require you to write something down spur of the moment. And then also I ask that you be willing to engage and challenge yourself. This is a challenging topic, and really there are no right answers. This is a general informational guide of how your mind works and how you can help, or how you can overcome those biases that you may have. And then most importantly, when you know better, do better. So finding where you may be lacking and trying to improve that consciously. And we'll get into that a little more. So first, I want to start off with one of my favorite quotes. So if your mind is empty, it is always ready for anything. It is open to everything. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. This is by Shunryu Suzuki in his book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And now I give you this quote because we tend to go into things without really an open mind. We are experts in our own fields, and maybe some of that plays into this, but really just trying to view this as if you were a beginner and you know nothing about diversity and inclusion. This will help you to process the materials that we're going through and also to just support everything that you learn. So briefly, I wanted to talk just a bit about myself to add on to what Mark had already mentioned. So I have a very unique background that allows me a lot of insight into this topic. So I was adopted into a white family at one, being mixed, both black and white. There was a lot of challenges there in my life. And then at 14, I moved to Tokyo, Japan. My father was in the Air Force, and that opened up a whole different range of opportunities and experiences. Then as a 19-year-old, I joined the US Air Force as a cryptologic linguist, where I specialized in Hebrew. And through a lot of that, I really began to acclimate to different cultures, as many of my friends were in other languages like Farsi and Dari and Pashto, all languages spoken in the Middle East. But I also had friends in Korean and Chinese. And just this mixture of us learning these languages opened up a lot of experiences with cultures that I had no previous interaction with. So then, while I was in the military, I was stopped at gunpoint for the first time by police. And this event really changed my perspective, because at that time I had really thought that it was kind of being sensationalized by the media. And so it was this experience that really began to change my perspective. And then I started working with sexual assault and prevention. while I had just gotten out of the military, which allowed me a completely different perspective on women's rights and how we view gender in this country. Then I finished a PhD in cognitive psychology, where I focused on experiential portions of our lives. And then I got my nose pierced and got several piercings on my ears. So why I bring these all up, these are all sources of bias that I've experienced in my life, or that have given me different biases. And we'll talk about that a little more when we go into intersectionality. But just as a brief overview of the different factors that really come into play when we're talking about bias, these are some of mine. So I hope you'll think about maybe some of those that have influenced your perspectives as we go through this training. The next thing that I think is most important when we're talking about bias is that everything psychological is simultaneously biological. Now, this is a common phrase in modern psychology, but it's one of the most important things in pretty much all of the trainings that I do, or any classes that I teach or presentations that I give, understanding that when something changes psychologically, something also has to change biologically. And likewise, if something changes biologically, something has to change psychologically. And so I really wanted to start this off with an example of how the mind-body interact. So this is a video that was put out by Coca-Cola a few years ago. But I really want you to just watch this and see what happens both psychologically and biologically as you do. Okay, so by show of hands on the Zoom feature, how many of you, while watching that video, found yourself smiling or even in some cases laughing? Okay. So it looks like a pretty good portion. I can't see everybody's, but it's just an example of how quickly something psychological can affect us biologically. And some of you may have found that you were laughing along with them. Others may find that maybe you feel a little better just after watching somebody else laugh. And so as we go on to talk more about how our biology affects our psychology, keep in mind that those around us also affect us. So something as simple as laughing without even a cause can provoke laughter in others, but it's also the opposite. So strong biases against somebody or against a group of people is also something that can be shared in a similar way. All right. So let's get into the topic at hand. So what exactly are we talking about when we talk about diversity and inclusion? So diversity refers to the division of workforce into distinction categories that have A, perceived commonality within a given cultural or national context, and that B, impact potentially harmful or beneficial employment outcomes, such as job opportunities, treatment in the workplace, promotional aspects, and this is all irrespective of somebody's ability to work or the skills and qualifications that they possess. Inclusion, on the other hand, means people of all identities and styles that can fully be themselves while also contributing to the larger collective as valued and full members. So it's that feeling that you're accepted despite your religion, despite your ability, despite your race, language, and other factors like that. So the next question then is, why is this important? Why am I here providing this training for everybody? There are a lot of different factors, and it really depends on the context, but when we're talking about organizational diversity and inclusion, an important theory to keep in mind is the optimal distinctiveness theory, which posits that individuals seek a balance between the need to find similarity and belongingness with others while also maintaining their own unique identity. So it's being able to fit in, that people want to fit in, but they also want to be able to express themselves how they would like to express themselves. And what this does for an organization is that it's critical for organizational excellence. So these different perspectives from different experiences allow teams to encompass diversity and allow them to excel at things like innovation, problem solving, and client outreach. It also, when inclusivity is heightened, then this creates a different organizational structure. People within a diverse organization tend to enjoy the culture more, and it also affects employee happiness. And 67% of workers consider diversity when they're seeking employment. And this is especially prominent for people of color or people of other sexual orientations or backgrounds. It also just reduces discrimination within the organization. Obviously, as more diversity is included within an organization, you get a variety of perspectives. And so when this organization is diverse, the amount of discrimination people experience is drastically decreased. And then exclusion can have negative effects as well. So it can have negative effects on psychological and physical health, whether it occurs overtly, such as an overt act of discrimination or prejudice, racial bias, or in a subtle form of discrimination. Those triggers that we have toward these different topics of diversity. And so diversity affects balance and innovation within an organization, but it's also an intersection of unique experiences and skill sets combined to empower one another. So this, again, impacts the client-customer interactions. Having a diverse and inclusive team not only benefits your organization, but it also allows you to reach out to people and organizations that may have otherwise been outside of that realm of wanting to work with you, or maybe not even understanding or considering your organization because of its lack of diversity. And it instills greater trust between employees and their leadership. So 1 in 5 HR and engagement leaders have stated that their employees trust their leadership. Only 1 in 5. So there's a big gap between employees working for somebody and employees actually trusting their leadership that they work for. It also increases employee performance. There's a study done by Gartner Research that found that workplaces with a diverse and equitable cast tend to have increases of productivity up to 30%. And then it's also important when engaging future generations. Companies that support diversity and inclusion initiatives are or attract roughly 83% of millennials. So this is a big topic, not just for the organization itself, but for reaching future employees potentially, and for all the future generations to come. So the categorization machine. Our brain has developed over time to have these categories for a specific purpose. And so through this section, I really want to give you an understanding of why that is, how it works, and how you can kind of spot it in your own life. So first, just talking a little bit about the brain and what it can actually do. So the brain can process 2 to 60 bits per second of information for attention, while it has 10 to the 6th power of bits per second for sensory processing. So what's this mean? This basically means that the things that we consciously do, me sitting here talking to you right now, you sitting there listening, consciously takes up such a minimal amount of our neural processing that we have, that so much of it is done on a totally different level. And just as an example, so if we take a 300-word paper or an article, it works out to be about 5 words per second if you're reading at a normal pace, 5 characters per word, 2 bits per character. So just to read a paper takes an immense amount of cognitive control. And if you read faster, then you're going to miss out on some of that information because your brain just can't process it all. And that's because of compression. So compression is cognitive control that basically combines or condenses whatever we're processing at that moment, whatever sensory, into something that's more bite-sized for us, which is about 3 to 4 bits of information per second. And this is especially important with difficult tasks. So for example, doing a math problem has a different compression effect on your ability to process this information than if you were doing something easier. Let's say writing about something that you are very familiar with, which may take a lot less cognitive control. And ultimately, this means that the unconscious mind is the one doing a lot of the processing. The majority of information that we receive and a lot of the information that we even project are all done subconsciously. And this is incredibly important as we continue to look into bias and understand how it works, is that you also have to understand that so much of your brain is devoted to unconscious processing of information that there is very little control that you actually have over what comes into your mind during those times. So understanding a little more. So the brain evolved to make these split-second decisions. It's an evolutionary trait that we needed to keep us safe. So for example, a lion lurking in the brush, and you can take a look at this picture and probably spot the lion fairly quickly because our brains have adapted to be able to do that task quickly. You only have a split second if there is a lion hunting you where you get a chance to run away or climb a tree or fight, whatever it is that you would need to do to survive. But it also involves a lot of Gestalt psychology. So Gestalt psychology is basically taking individual elements and combining them into a whole substance. So when you look at this tree, for example, do you see a tree, or are you taking the time to process that there are roots, that there are leaves, that there are branches, even that the sun is peeking through? And on this tree, you can immediately look at it and know that it's a tree. And that's essentially Gestalt psychology in a nutshell, is that our brain takes these individual pieces and puts them together for a quick understanding of what's in front of us. And most of that takes little, if any, effort consciously. This is all done subconsciously. And another factor that is biologically driven is pareidolia. So our brains are uniquely optimized to find faces in things, even if there's no real face to be had. So this is why people can find Jesus on crackers. You can see Elmo or Cookie Monster recently in a rock. So these different factors are built into us biologically that help us to be more efficient in how we approach people, and knowing that when there's a person there, our brains are optimized to identify that person specifically, which comes into play when we start talking about the other factors in bias, race and gender, and things that we can actively see. So our brains have now been trained to notice these things, race and gender, quickly categorizing them per our experiences in our past. So everything that I told you about myself earlier is a lens through which I perceive the world. So those experiences that I have, being the only Black person in a white family, being in the military, all of those different factors come into play when talking about, or when discussing my own biases. And so to kind of give you an example, if you just look at this picture, you can probably recognize three distinct individuals. One on the left, probably a monk based on their attire. Person in the middle looks like an elderly Black man, and the person on the right looks like a child. But none of this is done consciously. It's something that you can just look at and know right away kind of what's going on. So this is part of that processing that we have, where our brain instantly tries to make sense of what we're looking at. And so I wanted to do this example with you. So if you grab your pen and paper, and actually we can go back. So grab a pen and paper, and then I'm going to show you a series of pictures. And I really just want you to write down the first words that come to mind. And this is something that's just for you. You don't have to share it. Nobody else is going to look at it. But I want you to be open and honest with yourself when you see these pictures. And we'll go through them right now. So as you write these answers down, how much of the answer was consciously thought out? Did you have to sit there and process the entire image, or did a word immediately come to you the minute you saw a face or saw the image? So it's important to keep in mind that the brain always wants answers, and it doesn't matter if those answers are correct, stereotypical, or prejudiced. It wants to fill in the gap as quickly as possible. And so another way to demonstrate this is through this kind of game that I created. So I'm going to show you a series of words now, and all you really need to do is say them to yourself, but try to do it as quickly as possible. So for example, for this word blue, you say the color that the lettering is. So in this case, purple. And for this one, blue. And so I'll show you a series of words, and I want you to just try to keep up and say the colors in your head. You can say them out loud, whatever works best for you. Okay, so by show of hands again, how many of you saw the message embedded in that series of words? Okay. So out of the 68 participants we have on this call right now, we have a total of, what's that, 8 people that raised their hand. So I'll go back to, just to show. So I embedded this message in here specifically to show you how your brain processes information and when it compresses it. So in many cases, people don't even notice this message of, are you still reading? And that's because your brain can only process so much information at one time, and so it has to cut away some of that information. Now, some people are better at this, some people have a different area of focus, and so they were able to see the message, but in most cases, people completely miss the message because they're so focused on something else. And this is what happens to our brains when we're in those situations where our brain creates a mental shortcut to do a task particularly quickly or efficiently, but it doesn't always contain all of the information that we're receiving. Now, this is important when we're talking about in-groups and out-groups. So an in-group and an out-group is basically a group that you're a part of being an in-group and a group that you're not a part of being an out-group. So why do we categorize people at all? What purpose does this actually serve for us as a species? So there are a bunch of different reasons, but the most impactful ones that I found are to evaluate whether or not they're part of our in-group. So we first meet somebody, what we're trying to do is see, what their interests are, what area of work they're in, what's their expertise, and trying to find commonalities. Because we want to put people in our in-group. We want to be part of that group. That's not always the case. So we also do it because it creates a shortcut that simplifies the interaction. So as you just saw with all of the words, your brain may have created a shortcut to say the color quicker, but in doing so, that shortcut prevented you from seeing that message. It also preserves cognitive resources. So as I said earlier, we only have so much capacity for information. And so our brain tries to conserve those resources so that it can allocate them to other tasks, especially with sensory processing, as we saw, which is such a huge part of our lives. Even just looking at something is sensory processing, and touching something, feeling the wind, all of these different things. So our brain is trying to conserve those resources. It also helps us to feel safe or gauge somebody's authenticity or character. And in some cases, it's to gain an advantage or evaluate our own disadvantage in a particular conversation or within a particular group. And then for stability and confidence, we want to be the hero of our own story. We all view ourselves in a way that nobody else views us because we have a different understanding. And in our story, we're typically the hero of it. But while being the hero of our own story, a lot of times we can be the villain in somebody else's. And there are other factors that are involved. And this isn't just biological, but there's also psychological or intersectionality, which we'll get to in a second. But things like culture and religion. urban versus rural. So somebody from an urban center will have different perspectives and biases from somebody that comes from a rural center. Politics, as we saw, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, how this impacts our view of in-group and out-group, where many people lost friends and even family members over the events that have happened since the pandemic began. And then things like race and civil rights are obviously huge impactors in how we view in-group and out-group, whether it's Black Lives Matter, the Thin Blue Line, All Lives Matter. These are all different factors that play into our biases. And even coming down to mass shootings that play into our biases, where we choose to go, where we choose to eat, how much we choose to be out in the world, sending our kids to school, all factor in our own biases against people, against organizations, and the like. So more specifically, intersectionality affects bias. And basically, intersectionality is a combination of environmental or psychological factors. So it's the intersection of race, religion. It can be things such as hobbies, your physical health, political affiliations, gender expression, languages that you speak. All of these combine, or meet rather, intersecting where these kind of overlap in interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. So this can be your religion, political affiliation, how you view yourself. All of these factor into how you perceive the world, but also how others perceive you. And now I mentioned earlier that this is an innate factor in human psychology. And that's because unconscious biases develop early in life. We start creating biases the minute that we're able to start processing and understanding language, because we're being fed different facts. We're being taught how to behave, how to perceive people. And unconscious biases have real world effects on behavior. So the different factors that play into our lives affect how we perceive the world, and thus how we behave in certain circumstances. So for example, from my own life, I've always been in the middle of whether somebody views me as Black or whether somebody views me as white. And those different factors of whether the Black community is my in-group or whether the white community is my in-group has always kind of pulled me in both directions. And this has affected my behavior and how I perceive people, but also how I engage with different people in those communities, especially. Unconscious biases are malleable and ever-changing. So there's been some information out there that once you get to a certain age, you really stop learning and there's no way to change, which is not correct. Recent research has showed that we change throughout our entire lives and that anybody can change if they are willing to change. And biases follow the stories that we tell ourselves through our own worldview filter. So your whole list of experiences that you've gone through will play into the story that you tell yourself about a particular person, group of people, organizations, and the like. And associations are like highways in the brain. So the more a highway is used, the stronger that becomes in our brains. So if you think of it like an actual highway, if there were people commuting, the more people that are commuting, the more lanes you need. So you expand the lanes to encapsulate everybody that needs to get to work on that route. Our brain does the same thing. There are 2 points that it connects. And the more you use those connections, so if we want to say one regarding racism, Black people are lazy. The more you have those types of thoughts, the more you connect those 2 dots, the stronger that the association becomes, and the more likely you are to believe in that association, or to at least go to it. So I wanted to give you a couple more examples, this time a little more specific, of unconscious bias and how it affects people. So in this case, this is regarding somebody who is deaf. So when we rely on our experiences, biases will begin to formulate based on the associations we've made in the past. And again, all of this is done subconsciously. So one that people may hear is the "it's unfortunate" bias. And these are things like, "I'm sorry you're deaf. It must be difficult to live with that deafness." Or, "I don't know how you do it. I could never be deaf." Thereby showing some kind of pity that you have on somebody, which takes them from an in-group and places them in an out-group. Or something like, "Deafness is abnormal. I would never have guessed you were deaf. You seem normal to me." Or, "Can't you just get implants to fix it?" Again, taking that individual from an in-group and placing them in an out-group, subjecting them to the different things that you believe or have heard on this topic. And then down to stereotypes. So, do you have a super eyesight or something because you don't have your vision? Or because you don't have your hearing, sorry. Or, "I thought deaf people did X. Why don't you?" So stereotypes are taking information that you heard somewhere in the past and applying it to the situation right in front of you. And so these are just subtle, unconscious biases that we all have. And the extent of it depends on your experiences. But knowing that these are different factors that play into it will help you begin to notice them in your own life and hopefully begin to see how your mind comes to these conclusions and working to impede these types of unconscious biases. So one of the most important effects that we can discuss while talking about bias is the Dunning-Kruger effect. So basically, people want to look confident and intelligent, no matter what the topic is. And many people would rather feign knowledge than to actually admit they do not know and risk losing face. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is especially common when we're talking about areas that we want to either know about or think that we should know about. So for example, in a study that was conducted evaluating biases in medical students, they found that 50% of all white medical students believed one of the following. And this study was done in 2020. So these are physicians or about to be actual physicians in a hospital. That Black people's nerve endings are less sensitive than white people's. Black people's skin is physically thicker than white people's skin. Or Black people's blood coagulates more quickly than white people's. But people with disabilities also face similar discrimination. So for example, people with disabilities are brave and courageous to deal with the circumstances they have. People who are blind acquire that sixth sense. For some reason their hearing would be increased, or if they're deaf, their eyesight. Non-disabled people are obligated to take care of people with disabilities. And then when we come to sexuality and gender nonconformity and non-heterosexuality, there is a lot of bias and discrimination, but there also can be prodding and poking into that individual's personal life. So examples of these from an APA study, American Psychological Association study, they found that people believe that there are only two types of genitals, and so therefore there are only two sexes and two genders. Gender nonconformity and transsexuality is a mental disorder, and there's no biological components. Or you transition to a female, so you must have had surgery on your sexual organs and like men. Again, biases as to what a person is experiencing and taking information that maybe you've heard or saw and prodding into their own life about those experiences. An unconscious bias seeps into our understanding of the whole person, even depicting weight as indicators of success and ability. So for example, in a couple of other studies that were conducted on this particular topic, overweight people are lazy, that's why they're overweight. Overweight people just don't care about their health. Thin people are industrious and hardworking. These are all biases that these researchers found. So we've talked a little bit about what it is that factors into these unconscious biases and how our brain kind of works. So how do we then find that happy medium or find the place where we can notice our own biases and notice other people's biases and begin to kind of weed those out and become more inclusive? So there are many ways that we're prejudiced towards people, but how do we overcome these prejudices? So the most important thing is to pay attention. So when you have the sudden urge to say something about another person, stop for a moment and maybe consider their perspective. Could that person possibly be offended by it? Could you possibly hurt this person's feelings? And is it necessary to even say the thing that you have on your mind? Being conscious of how you interact with people will help you interact with them better or people similar to them in the future. So again, that comes back to those highway systems in the brain. The more you notice when a situation could bring up unconscious biases that you have, stopping for a moment and then moving in a different direction will help that become a normal process for you. And the more you do that, the easier it will become to take that process and really engage in it. So admit your biases. So one thing that has happened, especially a lot recently, is that people feel that they're not biased or not racist. Phrases like, I don't see color, come to mind. But we all see color, and as I talked about earlier, it's almost impossible for you not to see color because your brain has already started categorizing people the minute you meet them. And again, we love to be the hero of our own story, but heroes don't always succeed until they overcome their weaknesses. And you can never overcome a weakness if you don't admit that you have one. So admitting that you are biased, admitting that sometimes you have biased thoughts or prejudicial thoughts is just the beginning point to moving toward a more inclusive environment and being a more inclusive person. And then do better. So you don't know what you don't know. Maybe some of the information that I've provided you today, you didn't know until I provided it. But once you do have that information, be willing to change and grow and be cognizant of the traps you set to portray yourself as the hero. So when you know better, do better. And other things that can help you be more inclusive is not relying on those who are discriminated against to be inclusive or to gain information about their particular experiences in life. It's on you to educate yourself. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't ask your Black friend potentially about how they view a topic, like let's say the civil rights movement last year, but that you are actively educating yourself so that when you do, you can engage in that topic with the person. So you can read. There are books to understand every facet of discrimination. Books like Caste were fairly popular last year during the Black Lives Matter movement. And so reading can help you understand that perspective and open up your own worldview. Also exposure. So exposing yourself to the different pieces of intersectionality. So visiting with people from different religions, including different races in your friends, meeting with people from other communities. All of these different things, the more you experience them, the more those networks begin to expand. And instead of just going from point A to point B, you now have a different set of routes that your brain can take to come to these conclusions. And then also acknowledging your privilege. So taking time to spend your thoughts and empathy in somebody else's shoes. See how your experiences in the world may differ from theirs, and understanding that you may have some privilege where they do not. And you are the first line of support. So all of us in our daily lives are the first line of support. So stand up for your coworkers and friends, family, even a stranger if you happen to be in the vicinity. So being inclusive means promoting inclusion by valuing differences. So in your organization, standing up for the diversity and inclusion and fighting for a more inclusive workplace for those that you work with, but also potential future employees. And do not dismiss or ignore contributions of people or friends, people that are trying to learn and engage and become better. These are all good things. And even if they're not on the right topic, or maybe they even say something offensive and don't realize it, but you can help them be more inclusive instead of ignoring them. And then encouraging diversity. So ensure that you are encouraging diversity in your friends and family, coworkers. Be open-minded and non-judgmental. Again, trying to see from somebody else's perspective and giving them the benefit of the doubt. So when somebody tells you an experience that they've had, instead of trying to find where there may be a hole in the plot, giving them the benefit of the doubt that what they're saying is an experience that they've had. And then asking preferences. So asking whether somebody prefers a different pronoun, to be referred to by a different name, to be referred to by a different race. And then the other half of inclusivity is opposing exclusion. So identifying and calling out exclusive behavior if you see it. Correct exclusive language. If you hear somebody taking somebody from an in-group and placing them in an out-group, whether it's something like you're not being a team player because of this, or any other factors that may be in that language. Maybe you even notice that somebody's uncomfortable with how somebody is treating them or talking to them. So being that force to oppose exclusion, challenge the stereotypes. So when you hear somebody provide a stereotype, challenge it. And oppose calls for homogeneity. So having that homogeneous workforce where perhaps it's all white men or all men in general, all one religion, opposing those different things so that you can then have a more inclusive environment, and for those that you work with. And then acknowledge the complexity. So this is a very complex topic, and as I mentioned earlier, there are really no right answers. And it being such a complex topic, there may not even be one solution, but many solutions. So acknowledging the complexity that we're dealing with, and the complexity that is a person, that is somebody's life experiences, and not judging them based on anything that they say or do right off the bat, but trying to understand how they got to that conclusion. And then address your own privilege within your organization. So seeing how you may benefit from an exclusive environment and doing something to address that. So I wanted to make this a different kind of diversity and inclusion program. So one thing that I wanted to do is a guided meditation. Now, through this guided meditation, we're going to go through a series of different events with the goal of being empathetic and trying to empathize with people from backgrounds that we may not understand. But before we get into the guided meditation, I would like to give everybody about a 5-minute break to use the restroom, to get more comfortable. And then when we return, we will quickly do that and go through this guided meditation. And as you look at these different images and kind of process the routes that you took to get there, do you notice where your own experiences interpret these images? So as we go through the guided meditation, just being conscious of how your brain creates these symbols or words around these images, and then taking that and trying to put yourself into that person's shoes. And so for those on this call that are deaf, or if you prefer to keep your eyes open for whatever reason, that's perfectly fine. Please do so at your own convenience. The purpose of this exercise is really to get you into a dreamlike state, also known as a trance state, where you can focus more on empathizing than with just consuming a lot of information. So we're going to start this exercise with a muscle relaxation technique, and then we're going to work our way into the more trance-like state, and then hopefully into a place where you can really empathize with people and try to understand their own perspectives. So if you would, for those of you that are willing to close your eyes, just close your eyes. Everybody get comfortable. And as you're beginning to relax, just begin to envision the last few drops of a shower, a warm shower where the water kind of lands on your head and begins to trickle down. And as the water touches the different parts of your body, just allowing those muscles to relax so that you can feel a little more comfortable. So we'll start with the top of the head, water running down to the forehead, relaxing all the muscles in the forehead, relaxing the muscles in the cheek and jaw. A lot of tension we carry in our masseters right here on the side of our jaw. So just allowing the jaw to become loose and just hang slightly. As the water trickles down to the neck, feeling the muscles becoming warm and comfortable, down to the shoulders. Again, just letting the shoulders sink down, really feeling gravity as it pulls the shoulders down toward the earth, feeling the weight heavy but warm and comfortable. And then down the arms, so feeling it in the upper arm, relaxing all the muscles as you move down to the elbow, the forearm, the wrist, and then your hands. And just find a nice comfortable place for the hands to relax, whether that's by your side or on your lap. And then the water running down the front and back of your body, allowing the muscles in the chest and back to relax. Then down to the abdomen and low back. And just try to breathe through the stomach. With each breath, just allow the stomach to expand just slightly, but moving the breath down into the abdomen. Feeling more comfortable with each breath, allowing the muscles to become even softer. Then down to the waist, the hips, and then the thighs. Allowing the thighs to become nice and soft as gravity pulls your legs down, perhaps making the thigh pancake out. As the muscles become more relaxed, become more limp, and more comfortable. And then moving down to the knees, and then the shins and calves, the muscles relaxing, then down to the ankles, and then your feet. And just feel your feet on the floor beneath you, or if you find yourself in a different position, just feeling the feet as gravity pulls them down. And then as you relax the body more and more, just allow each breath to relax you even more, feeling the muscles becoming even softer, more relaxed. And then we'll begin the guided meditation. And now it's easier to enter this dreamlike state if you go on a kind of journey. And it can be any type of path that you would like. For some people, it can be something like a tunnel. And maybe you can see a pinpoint of light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe this tunnel is made of brick, or it could be a natural tunnel made of vines and branches, trees and flowers. For others, it could be a bridge to a new place. And others still, it could be a path through a forest. It doesn't really matter what the path looks like for you. All that matters is that you begin to walk down that path, beginning to feel your feet on the ground beneath you. Maybe you notice that the ground is soft or hard. Maybe it's a rocky terrain, or maybe it's grass. And as you continue to walk down this path, just begin to notice the different sights and sounds around you. Maybe you can feel a slight breeze. Maybe you notice birds in the air, seemingly playing a game of chase. Maybe there are big, fluffy white clouds sailing across the blue of the sky. Maybe you take a nice, comfortable breath, and as you exhale, you feel a nice release. I don't really know what you'll feel, what you'll see, hear, maybe even smell, and that's perfectly fine. Just as long as you keep moving deeper and deeper down the path. feeling more and more comfortable, feeling more and more relaxed. And the further down the path you go, the further away your body can feel. And also know that no matter how distant your body may feel, it's always close enough if you need it or want it. But just allowing that mind-body separation to continue growing as you move down the path. In fact, at this point, you may have already forgotten or not noticed that your breathing has changed. Or maybe your heart rate has changed. Or maybe you completely forgot where your hands were resting until I draw your attention to it. And so you can just allow that comfortable separation to continue to grow as you go deeper and deeper down the path. And as you do, maybe you begin to notice other things in the environment. Maybe you catch the slight smell of flowers in a nearby field. Maybe you begin to notice the sun as it warmly touches your skin, comfortable. And as you continue to move down the path, feeling how each step brings you closer to that comfortability, your arms and legs moving without any conscious thought, feeling more relaxed with each step. And as you continue down the path, you may begin to sense a kind of energy ahead. And I don't know what kind of energy that may be for you, but perhaps it's something pleasant, something inviting. Like when you go home or see a close friend, and the anticipation of that experience gives you a sense of belonging, perhaps hope, maybe even peace. And so as you notice this energy and begin to move toward it, just begin to allow it to deepen your relaxation and comfort, as if it were pulling you in for a nice, warm hug. And the closer you get, the more you may experience these sensations: positive, relaxing, comforting. And then perhaps you look around the environment and suddenly you notice a large tree directly in front of you on your pathway. Now, this tree may be quite grand. You may have to tilt your head all the way back to see to the very top. And as you look on this tree, maybe you notice some things that we discussed earlier. The roots of this tree, how they dig deep into the soil, where this tree gathers nutrients and water and everything else it needs to survive, holding it firmly in the ground beneath your feet. And maybe you begin to notice there are other people around as well. Maybe you notice that there's somebody in a wheelchair beside you, looking up at the tree in awe. Maybe there's a person of color and you notice their face. Maybe there's a person of different sexual orientation. I don't know exactly who will be there at the tree for you. But as you begin to notice different people around you, maybe you begin to have questions. What has this person gone through in their life? Perhaps what has this person's life been like in a wheelchair? Do they have people that constantly want to do something for them, even when they're capable of doing it themselves? Perhaps you can visualize sitting in a wheelchair and rolling down the street, trying to get into a building and realizing there are only stairs and the complications that brings. Maybe it's the eyes of other people around you, the questioning gaze. And this is something you experience every day as you get up, ready to leave your house, maybe even expecting these things to happen. What would it be like to be bound to a wheelchair? How would that change your perspective of the world? And as you think about these things, maybe you notice somebody else around the tree. Maybe it's a person of color, a Black man. Maybe you wonder about the civil rights movement that happened last year and how that affected the person. How difficult it must be to walk into a store and have the shop owner follow you around, making sure you don't steal anything. Or maybe it's walking down the street and the person ahead of you notices you and with a quick glance crosses the street to avoid that interaction or being within that vicinity. Or what it's like to tell your kids that if they're ever stopped by a policeman, that they should change how they talk, that they should address them with a particular title. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, Mr. Police Officer. What kind of experience would that be? Unable to hide your skin color, but persistent, prejudicial behavior you experience, perhaps even on a daily basis. and all the other ramifications of slavery. And then maybe you notice a woman. Maybe for you it's easier to empathize with a woman, or perhaps it's not. But maybe you can see from that perspective of what it's like to work in an organization that is dominated by men in a male culture. Maybe you had to get used to people hitting on you. Maybe you accept it, even though every single time it denigrates you, or makes you feel lesser. Maybe it's the fear of walking at night alone, or the fear of even going on a first date with somebody and not really knowing what could happen. Maybe it's the feeling of finding out that your coworkers or colleagues make more than you do, even though you do equal amount of work. Maybe it's feeling objectified, and it's not about the work you do at all. It's simply how you dress. And every day, these are factors that come to your mind as you get ready for work. Unsure of what the future may hold. And maybe you notice somebody else that's of a different orientation sexually. Maybe they're gay or lesbian or transsexual. It doesn't really matter. But maybe you can feel what it's like to wonder about your own self, trying to figure out your own preferences, trying to understand who you're attracted to, or even if you're supposed to be male or female. And how difficult that could be for a person that believes themselves to be male but is identified as a female. How would that change your perspective on people? and on life. Maybe it's such a sensitive topic in your family that you haven't told a single person. Maybe you've lost family. Just because you want to be who you are and they couldn't understand. Maybe you were even kicked out of your church or place of worship. They couldn't allow you to stay. They couldn't support your happiness. And then as you get older, you begin to feel or really know who you are and what you like. But are never completely free to express yourself, to dress how you want to dress, to wear makeup or no makeup. Maybe those choices have already been taken from you. And so it's a struggle to find the balance. And how people perceive you differently once they find out about your orientation or history. Or maybe you notice somebody that's overweight. Somebody that has struggled with weight their entire lives. And what it would be like to be consistently judged about your effectiveness and who you are as a person based on how you look. Maybe it was the first insult that somebody threw at you in middle school that still haunts you to this day. Maybe it's the constant suggestions from other people that you should go on a diet or lose weight or change something about your behavior. Maybe it's a fear of going to a new workplace, afraid that others will judge or mock. Maybe it's a fear you have every day, that when you eat, somebody will make a comment poke, a prod. And each one makes you feel lesser. Maybe it makes you feel unconfident or shy. Or maybe it's somebody of a different religion, a different faith than your own. Perhaps you grew up Christian, or maybe still are. Maybe you've never noticed or empathized with somebody from Islam, a Muslim that arrived to this country, maybe in their teens. Perhaps they fled war, and this was the place that brought them some safety. But how upon arriving here, even mentioning that you're Muslim provides a barrier to connection with people. Maybe you've heard the word terrorist thrown around. Maybe you feel uncomfortable in certain groups, or even approaching people you don't know because of how they'll perceive you. But maybe you love God, Allah, and praying every day brings you joy and peace. And all you want to do is be a better person. But it's difficult when you can't even be yourself, or you have to hide pieces of yourself. And so as you think about all the different people around this tree, and their experiences, you may begin to sense a kinship with these people, a connection that maybe you can't explain. Maybe you can really feel their pain. Maybe you can really empathize with with their experience. Maybe you can see how your own perspectives and worldview have not always encompassed the vast array of human people on this planet. And so, as you feel this kinship, maybe you begin to realize things about yourself that you hadn't realized before. Maybe you notice times where you were prejudiced or biased, where you didn't take enough time to fully evaluate the words that you used in a conversation, or how you treated an individual. Maybe this is the first time you really put yourself in that person's shoes. And if it is, that's fine. But now that you know better, you can do better. And so as you look around at this group of people, wondering about their experiences, walking in their shoes, it's also important to just feel the connections that you do have with all these people that may be vastly different from yourself, but you are still connected to. It's as if the tree's roots running along the ground are connecting everybody around the tree, as if we're all one. And how good it feels to be with a group of people that are so different, where their perspectives can change your perspective, where you can learn where you may have been unable to learn before. And so for just a moment, I'm going to be quiet. And all you need to do is notice the connections around you and just feel the positive connections you have with all these people. And if not anything else, that they are human, just like you, with a life and perspective from their own experiences. I'll be quiet now and just take a moment to let the mind wander to these positive feelings and see where it goes. And as you do, notice the things that you can celebrate. Things that empower, and the things that include them in your in-group. Because we're all connected in some way. All we need to do is take the time to notice. But now it's time to return from the tree and begin your journey home. So you can begin to walk back along the path. Again, feeling that connected energy and knowing that you can take it with you. You can place it in a bag or a backpack and give it a symbol or an object, something that you can remember, so that in the future, if you need an experience like this or just need a reminder, you can return to your bag or backpack, whatever receptacle you have, and look inside and notice that object or symbol. And remember how connected we all are. And as you walk back along the path, just enjoying the peace and comfort you may feel right now. Enjoying any positive emotions that you have. And bringing with you any meaningful experiences that will help you be more inclusive. And as you walk along the path, again noticing the feet on the ground beneath you, feeling it squish or slide between your toes maybe. Noticing the green of the trees, how the branches dance in the wind. Or maybe the sound of the ocean rolling, or a river running. And all the things that will help you feel more at peace. And as you continue down the path, again starting to feel the body that may have been distant just a moment ago. And starting with the feet, just wiggling the toes, waking the feet up, and then moving up the legs, from the shin, the knee, the thighs, the hips, the waist, and then the stomach, again breathing through the belly, nice and comfortably, up to the chest, shoulders, then moving down the arms, the upper arm, elbow, forearm, and hands. And just wiggling the fingers slightly, waking them up. And then moving up to the neck, the jaw and cheeks, to the forehead, and then the top of the head. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and rejoin. So thank you all for joining me today. I hope that guided meditation was relaxing as well as insightful. And I hope you learned a lot about how your mind works, how we're all innately biased, but that we can fight that bias by just noticing when it comes into play in our lives. And at this point, we can take questions or however you want to move forward, Mark.
Oh, thanks so much, Dr. Pearcey. I really appreciate your time today. It's really, today was really exactly what the CCLN IDEA subcommittee hoped the first part in our IDEA training series would be. Such a broad introduction to biases and presented in such a unique way with the guided meditation. I know that for me, it really put me in a place where I let my guard down and then wham, I was challenged to really empathize with others that might be different than myself. So for that, thank you.
Absolutely.
The IDEA subcommittee now can focus on future trainings that are more specific to the marginalized communities, many of whom were mentioned today. Again, a huge shout out to the CCLN IDEA subcommittee members for their help in bringing our membership today's training. Dr. Pearcey, is it okay if I share your email in chat? I've already received some emails from members interested in engaging you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Do that
That'd be
right
perfectly
now.
okay.
I just shared Dr. Pearcey's email for those that have already sent me an email. And this recording, this session was recorded and it will be posted to our website. And there I will also, if it's okay with you, Dr. Pearcey, put contact information for you.
Absolutely. Yes, please do.
Wonderful. Really appreciate the opportunity to have you present to us today. So thanks so much. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here, truly.
Excellent, excellent. Folks, please plan to join us at next month's CCLN monthly member meetup. That's going to be Friday, November 19th from 12 to 2, where we will hear from our CCLN endorsed insurance broker, New Front Insurance. They've assembled a team of presentations for you, which we're real excited about. The topic will be on risk management, cost containment, and some COVID considerations. With so many things changing daily, we don't want to say too much, but we do hope to definitely see you all there at next month's monthly member meetup. That is definitely a wrap for today. This was one of the most relaxing CCLN monthly member meetups we've ever had. So I feel good continuing on with my Friday and hope everyone is also ready to soon start the weekend and enjoy a nice weekend. So thanks everybody for sticking with us today and have a great weekend. That's a wrap.